Ashland did not believe in silence. Even when the artillery paused and the gunships retreated beyond the cloud line, the planet hummed with residual energy, ion storms scraping across the upper atmosphere, broken relay towers ticking as they discharged static, the distant groan of tectonic stabilizers buried beneath the crust. The war here was never loud all at once. It was persistent, like a bad habit. Sergeant Isaac Grant moved through the skeletal remains of a communications outpost that no longer communicated with anyone. His boots crunched over crystalline dust, the byproduct of orbital strikes that had fused sand into fragile glass. The visor of his helmet flickered with tactical overlays, thermal signatures, wind velocity, a polite reminder that his oxygen filters would require maintenance in 6 hours. He dismissed that last notification. If he survived 6 hours, he would consider it a personal victory. "Scan perimeter," he muttered. His wrist unit complied, projecting a faint lattice of blue light across the collapsed walls. No immediate hostiles, no active drones, just heat ghosts where fires had once been. Isaac adjusted the rifle at his shoulder and stepped deeper into the ruin. The border had shifted again this week. It tended to do that. Politicians drew lines, soldiers bled on them, planets endured. The relay station's central chamber had caved inward, its ceiling fractured like a cracked skull. Cables hung from above, swaying gently in the wind that slipped through the broken structure. A blinking emergency beacon pulsed weakly near the far wall, its power cell clearly offended by the concept of longevity. He approached it out of habit more than hope. Salvage, even broken salvage, counted toward reports. Reports counted toward promotions. Promotions counted toward never coming back to Ashland. His visor pinged. Heat signature. Low. Fading. Isaac froze. The signal came from beneath a slab of composite alloy half buried in debris. Not large enough to be a vehicle. Not small enough to ignore. He crouched, rifle angled but not raised. His display outlined the shape in amber. Humanoid. Core temperature dropping. Irregular pulse. "Fantastic," he muttered. "I specifically ordered a quiet patrol." He slid the rifle to his back and braced himself against the slab. Servos in his suit whined softly as he lifted. The metal shifted just enough to reveal a hand beneath it. Slender, dust-streaked, trembling faintly. Not gloved, not armored. Bare skin. Isaac eased the slab aside. She lay on her side amid fractured panels and shattered circuitry. Uniform torn at the shoulder, where something sharp had cut through. Blood, dark and almost indistinguishable from human in color, soaked into the dust beneath her. For a fleeting, disorienting moment, he thought she was human. Then he saw her ears. They curved back elegantly from her head, longer than any human's, tapering to subtle points that were neither delicate nor monstrous, simply different. Strands of pale hair clung to her cheek, stirred by the faint breeze filtering through the ruin. Her eyes opened. They were clear, focused, terrified. For one suspended second, they stared at each other through the thin distortion of his visor. Recognition passed between them, swift and absolute. Uniform insignia, weapon silhouette, enemy. Isaac felt her body tense. She did not reach for a weapon. She did not plead. She closed her eyes. It was not dramatic. There was no flinch, no trembling gasp. Just a quiet, deliberate closing, as if she were complying with a protocol long rehearsed. Isaac remained kneeling. Wind slipped through broken walls. Somewhere outside, a distant explosion rolled across the plain like irritated thunder. He studied her face. Her breathing was shallow. Her hands were open against the ground, palms visible. Submission or surrender or acceptance. He glanced at his rifle. Regulations were clear about enemy combatants discovered behind contested lines. Protocol favored efficiency. He sighed inside his helmet. "Of course," he said softly, "I finally find someone on this planet and she expects me to be efficient." No response. Her eyes stayed closed. He reached up and disengaged his helmet seals. The outer shell retracted with a mechanical whisper, exposing his face to Ashland's thin, metallic air. The filters in his collar compensated automatically. If she was waiting for a shot, he reasoned, she might as well see the person supposedly pulling the trigger. She did not open her eyes. Up close, He could see that she was young, no older than he was perhaps. Her features were almost human in symmetry, her skin pale beneath streaks of dust. Only the length of her ears betrayed her species, catching faint light along their edges. He shifted his weight, scanning her injuries. Laceration at the shoulder, bruising along her ribs, possible internal trauma. She's not going to survive long like this, he murmured to himself. His mother used to press a kiss against his forehead whenever storm sirens wailed back home on Meridian Colony. He had been 8, maybe 9, convinced the sky itself had declared personal war on him. She would lean down, calm and certain, and kiss his brow as if sealing a promise that fear was temporary. The memory surfaced uninvited. He did not analyze it. He leaned forward. Very gently, he brushed his lips against her forehead. The gesture was brief, light, almost absurd in the middle of a battlefield. Her eyes snapped open. Confusion replaced terror so abruptly that he nearly laughed. "What?" she whispered hoarsely, voice rough from dust and dehydration. "Was that?" "A medical intervention," he replied gravely. "Highly classified." She stared at him. He gave her a small shrug. "You're bleeding. I'm fixing that. Try not to die before I finish. It complicates paperwork." Her gaze flicked toward his uniform insignia, then back to his face. She seemed to be searching for something. Cruelty, perhaps. Satisfaction. Any confirmation that the universe still followed predictable rules. Instead, she found a tired soldier kneeling in the dust with a med kit already in his hands. He activated it. The compact device unfolded like metallic petals, projecting sterile light over her wound. Nanofiber threads extruded from its core, weaving across torn tissue with delicate precision. She inhaled sharply as antiseptic foam sealed the cut. "You are human," she said slowly. "That's the rumor," he answered. "I try not to let it define me." Her brow furrowed. "You should execute me." "That seems excessive," he said. "We just met." Her expression did not change. "Your kind executes prisoners." "Some do," he said evenly. "Some don't. We're annoyingly diverse." The medkit chimed softly as it stabilized her shoulder. He shifted position to assess her ribs, running a scanner along her side. Hairline fractures. Painful, not fatal. She watched every movement of his hands. "Why?" she asked again, quieter now. He paused, considering. "Because you're injured," he said at last, "and because I'm tired of being predictable." A distant mechanical whine drifted through the ruin, patrol drones sweeping the sector. Isaac glanced toward the opening in the wall, then back at her. "Here's the situation," he said lightly. "In approximately 2 minutes, something unfriendly with too many sensors is going to fly overhead. I would prefer not to explain why I'm kneeling beside an injured alien soldier. So we're going to relocate." She blinked at him. "You would take me?" "I would prefer to leave you here and enjoy a quiet afternoon," he admitted. "But apparently I've decided to complicate my life." He slid an arm carefully beneath her shoulders. She stiffened, but did not resist. "Relax," he murmured. "If I intended harm, I promise I'd be far less gentle." Her elongated ears trembled slightly in the wind as he lifted her. The drone's hum grew louder. Isaac adjusted her weight against him, glancing once more at the fractured sky beyond the ruins. Ashland continued to hum, indifferent. "Welcome to the worst tour of your life," he said softly, and carried her into the shifting shadows. The drone passed so low above the shattered relay station that Isaac felt the vibration in his teeth. He had already carried her into the hollow skeleton of a collapsed transport bay 100 meters east, a place where twisted beams formed a crooked rib cage against the sky. He crouched behind a slab of scorched plating and adjusted the camouflage field on his suit, muting their thermal output to a dim smear, barely warmer than the surrounding wreckage. "Try not to glow," he whispered. Lyria did not know what glowing meant in this context, but she understood the tone. She lay half reclined against the cold metal, breathing shallowly as the med gel tightened across her shoulder. Her people had taught her that humans were impulsive predators with volatile emotional spikes and a preference for theatrical violence. The man kneeling beside her was currently arguing with his wrist console in a low, irritated voice. I am aware the ionosphere is unstable, he muttered. That's why I'm hiding under a pile of scrap with an injured alien. Adapt. The console blinked a warning about signal degradation and probable aerial surveillance. Isaac tapped it twice as if that would intimidate it into cooperation. The drone's shadow skimmed across the broken terrain and moved on. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Ashland's wind slipped through the skeletal bay, carrying metallic dust that glimmered faintly in the afternoon light. Far to the west, artillery thudded like a distant heartbeat. You should have left me, Lyria said at last. Isaac leaned back against the slab and glanced at her. You're repeating yourself. I assume that means you're feeling better. Her elongated ears angled slightly backward, a subtle shift he was beginning to interpret as frustration. You risk your position. Your command will not approve. My command rarely approved, he said. Last week I requisitioned better coffee and was told morale builds character. She stared at him as if he had shifted into another language. Humor she was discovering was not easily translatable. He checked the medkit again. The nanofibers had sealed the external laceration, but internal bruising remained. He activated a deeper scan. A holographic projection of her skeletal structure shimmered between them, faint blue lines mapping fractures and stress points. Her anatomy was almost identical to his own. Rib placement, spinal curvature, joint articulation. Variations were minimal. Only subtle differences in cranial ridges and the delicate cartilage structure of her ears distinguished her species in any meaningful way. Congratulations, he said. You have ribs. This simplifies things. You are pleased? She asked cautiously. I'm relieved. If you had 3 extra organs, I'd have to read the manual. He injected a slow-release analgesic along her side. She flinched but did not pull away. Her gaze studied his face openly now, searching for deception. He wore no expression of triumph, only concentration and something else, weariness. My training states, she began carefully, that your kind does not show mercy to captured combatants. Your training sounds depressing, he replied. Mine says I should never eat battlefield rations after their expiration date. We all ignore parts. She considered that. You do not fear punishment? He hesitated just briefly. Of course I do, he admitted. But fear doesn't get to schedule my decisions. A tremor rolled through the ground beneath them as a distant orbital strike met its target. Dust drifted from the warped beams above. Lyria's breathing quickened instinctively. Isaac noticed and, without thinking, rested his hand lightly against her uninjured shoulder. Not restraining, just steadying. It's not close, he said. If it were, we'd both be vapor. That is not reassuring. Reassurance is relative. Her eyes narrowed faintly, but there was no hostility in it now, only confusion layered over exhaustion. He shifted his position, scanning the horizon through a gap in the wreckage. We need to move before sunset. Thermal contrast spikes when the temperature drops. Drones will see us like fireworks. You intend to take me into your territory, she said. Temporarily, he corrected. Think of it as a cultural exchange program. Very exclusive. She tried to sit upright on her own this time. Pain rippled through her expression, but she refused to cry out. Her pride was as tangible as her injuries. He extended a hand. She looked at it as if it were a puzzle. After a moment, she placed her hand in his. Her skin was warm despite the cooling air. Her grip was firm, though not entirely steady. He pulled her gently to her feet, adjusting his stance so she could lean against him without losing balance. You are heavier than you appear, he said conversationally. I am not heavy. Then I am weaker than I believed. Let us not analyze this further. Despite herself, a faint, involuntary sound escaped her, something dangerously close to a laugh. It startled both of them. He glanced down at her, eyebrows raised. Careful, if you start laughing, I'll assume I'm hilarious. I did not laugh, she said quickly, though her ears tilted in a way that betrayed her. They began moving along the fractured edge of the transport bay, keeping low. Isaac adjusted his suit's field emitters, projecting a distortion layer that bent light subtly around them. It was imperfect. Ashland's magnetic fluctuations interfered constantly, but it was better than walking openly through contested ground. As they navigated the debris field, Lyria's gaze flicked across the horizon. This world had been contested for decades, its soil layered with the remains of both species' technology. Human dropships lay half-buried beside the sleek remnants of her people's atmospheric gliders. The planet itself seemed tired. "Why do your people fight for this place?" Isaac asked quietly. She hesitated. "It is strategic." "That's not a reason. That's a vocabulary word." Her lips pressed together. "Our histories claim this world was once ours." "Funny," he said. "Ours say the same." She glanced at him sharply. "One of us is correct." "Probably neither," he replied. "History is written by whoever survives long enough to file the report." They reached the edge of the bay and paused. Ahead stretched a shallow ravine carved by ancient water and recent artillery. The path down was uneven but provided cover. Isaac assessed her stability. "Can you manage a slow descent?" "I will not require carrying," she said firmly. He inclined his head. "Understood. I reserve the right to say, 'I told you so,' if you collapse." They moved carefully down the slope. Twice she stumbled. Twice he steadied her without comment. By the third misstep, she accepted his support without protest. At the bottom of the ravine, the air felt cooler, shielded from the worst of the wind. Bioluminescent lichen clung to the rock walls, glowing faintly green. It painted her features in soft light, highlighting the elegant curve of her ears. He noticed her studying him again. "What?" he asked. "You are not what I expected," she said. "That's disappointing. I rehearsed." She ignored that. "Your expression when you found me, it did not contain hatred." He considered that as they walked. "Hatred requires energy," he said at last. "Ashland already charges too much." She absorbed this in silence. Above them, another drone passed, its sensors sweeping uselessly over the ravine's insulated depth. Isaac exhaled slowly. "We'll shelter here until the next patrol window closes," he said. "After that, we head east." "To your lines?" "Yes." She stopped walking. He turned back toward her. "If I cross into your territory," she said carefully, "my people will consider me compromised." "And mine will consider me reckless," he replied. "We'll be very symmetrical." She searched his face again, perhaps hoping to find the cruelty her training had promised would eventually surface. Instead, she found a soldier who had chosen an unpredictable variable. "Why did you kiss my forehead?" she asked suddenly. The question hung between them, fragile and absurd amid the ruined ravine. He blinked once. "Because you looked terrified." "That is not a tactical reason." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." He leaned lightly against the rock wall, watching the faint glow of the lichen ripple across her features. "My mother used to do that," he said. "When I was afraid, it meant, 'You're not alone.' I figured you might need that message more than a bullet." Lyria stood very still. No doctrine had prepared her for this explanation. In the distance, the war continued its restless murmur. But in the quiet depth of the ravine, something else had begun. Small, improbable, and far more destabilizing than any weapon either side possessed. She did not close her eyes this time. Night on Ashland did not fall. It assembled itself. The sky darkened in deliberate layers as ionized clouds shifted across the upper atmosphere, scattering faint auroras that shimmered in bruised shades of violet and blue. The ravine trapped the cool air, and the bioluminescent lichen brightened in response to the dropping temperature, painting the rock walls in an eerie glow. Isaac adjusted the portable field emitter beside him. The device projected a low-intensity distortion bubble around their position, scrambling most thermal scans and dampening sound waves. It would not withstand direct scrutiny, but it was enough to blur them into the planet's background noise. "Welcome to my luxurious accommodations," he murmured. "We offer complimentary mineral dust and unpredictable artillery." Lyria sat with her back against the stone, her injured shoulder stabilized by a reinforced brace from his kit. The analgesic had dulled the sharper edges of pain, though she could still feel the deep ache beneath her ribs. She studied the shimmering field around them. "That device," she said, "bends light. And heat, and most basic sensor sweeps," he replied. "It's like convincing the universe we're uninteresting." Her elongated ears angled forward slightly as she observed the faint ripples along the distortion bubble. "Your technology is inelegant." "That is the nicest insult I've received all week." I did not intend. It's fine, he said. We specialize in functional ugliness. A distant pulse of light flickered above the ravine's edge. A patrol drone drifted by, its underside bristling with scanning arrays. Isaac watched its trajectory carefully, tracking its rhythm. They sweep in cycles of 11 minutes, he said. Ashland's magnetic storms disrupt their deeper scans. They compensate with frequency repetition. Very predictable. You speak as if you admire them. I admire predictability, he replied. It's comforting. Lyria tilted her head slightly. Yet you behave unpredictably. He considered that and then smiled faintly. Hypocrisy is a core human trait. Silence settled between them again, but it was no longer heavy. The ravine's glow softened her features, and for the first time he saw curiosity outweigh fear in her expression. You asked why we fight for this world, she said quietly. My people believe Ashland contains ancient archives beneath its crust, records from before our expansion. Lost libraries, he asked. Yes, data older than our current civilization. Isaac leaned back against the stone. So we're both killing each other over a planet-sized hard drive. It is not so simple. It rarely is. She watched him in the dim light. Your people? Officially? Strategic supply corridors and mineral extraction rights? He gestured vaguely toward the surface above. Unofficially? Pride. Her lips pressed together thoughtfully. Pride has a high casualty rate. Very, he agreed. A tremor passed faintly through the ground. Somewhere beyond the ravine, an exchange of fire erupted. Brief, violent, and then gone. Neither of them flinched this time. Isaac checked his wrist display again. Communication remained erratic. Ion interference scattered his signal like dust in wind. We move at first light, he said. There's an abandoned atmospheric skimmer depot 2 kilometers east. If I can coax one engine to life, we can cross the next contested stretch faster than patrols can triangulate. You are confident. I am optimistic. Confidence implies competence. You lack competence? He glanced at her. I prefer not to commit to statements I might regret. A faint curve touched her mouth. It vanished quickly, but he saw it. You find this amusing, she observed. I find survival amusing, he replied. It irritates the universe. She shifted slightly, testing her balance. You are not concerned that I may harm you once recovered? He looked at her evenly. Are you planning to? No. Then I'll postpone the concern. She studied him, perplexed again by the absence of suspicion in his tone. My conditioning, she said slowly, was designed to prepare me for interrogation, for torture, for execution, not for this. This, he echoed. Conversation. He nodded once. Conversation is dangerous. Her ears angled in question. It allows people to compare notes, he explained. Propaganda hates comparison. Above them, another drone passed, closer this time. The distortion field hummed faintly as it absorbed the scan. Lyria's gaze flicked upward. If we are discovered, what will you do? Complain loudly, he said, then improvise. She did not appear reassured. He reached into his pack and retrieved a compact ration bar, snapping it in half and offering one piece to her. She hesitated before accepting it. This is not poisoned? She asked. Only nutritionally. She examined the dull gray slab. It appears synthetic. It aspires to be food, he corrected. She took a cautious bite. Her expression shifted subtly through confusion, disappointment, and faint disbelief. You consume this willingly? Under protest. Despite the situation, she released a quiet breath that almost resembled laughter again. He leaned back, watching the auroras flicker faintly above the ravine's lip. Why did you close your eyes? He asked after a moment. She did not pretend to misunderstand. Our doctrine states that enemy soldiers show more respect if one accepts death calmly, she said. Resistance invites cruelty. He absorbed that quietly. And you believed I would execute you, he said. Yes. Immediately. Yes. He rubbed a hand over his jaw thoughtfully. Efficient, at least. She studied his profile. You seemed disappointed. I was, he admitted. You didn't even try to argue. Her brow furrowed. Argue? Yes. If you're going to assume I'm terrible, at least present evidence. Demand a trial. Make a speech. Closing your eyes felt anticlimactic. She stared at him in disbelief. You are offended by my acceptance of death? Only mildly. For a moment, she simply looked at him, and then, unexpectedly, she shook her head. Your species is illogical. Frequently, the night deepened. The glow of the lichen intensified, casting shifting shadows along the rock walls. Isaac recalibrated the field emitter again, fine-tuning its output to compensate for rising interference. You said your people believe archives lie beneath Ashland, he said. What kind of records? Cultural origins, pre-expansion history, evidence of our earliest settlements. Proof you were here first, he said. Yes, he considered that. If you found them, and they confirmed your claim, would the war end? She hesitated. It would strengthen our position. That wasn't my question. Her silence lingered longer this time. I do not know, she admitted. He nodded slowly. Honest answer. She shifted her weight carefully. And you, if your people proved prior claim? Someone would still argue, he said. Humans are remarkably talented at arguing. Her ears angled slightly in what he was beginning to recognize as curiosity rather than suspicion. You are not as your doctrine describes, she said. And you're not as mine does, he replied. A faint hum began to build in the distance. Lower, heavier than the patrol drones. Isaac stiffened slightly. Ground transport, he murmured. Close. Lyria instinctively straightened, tension returning to her posture. He reached out, resting his hand lightly against her wrist. Stay still. The distortion field shimmered as armored vehicles rolled along the plateau above, their grav engines vibrating through the stone. Voices crackled faintly over amplified comms, indistinct but unmistakably human. Lyria's breathing grew shallow again. They will find us, she whispered. Not if we remain profoundly boring, he replied. The vehicles paused above. Scanners swept outward, brushing the ravine's edge. The distortion field trembled faintly, struggling against the focused scan. Isaac adjusted the emitter manually, diverting power from non-essential systems. The field dimmed around the edges but held. Seconds stretched thin, then the vehicles moved on. The vibration receded into the distance. Lyria exhaled slowly. You risk much for someone you met hours ago, she said. He glanced at her. Technically, you risked more. You closed your eyes. Her gaze held his. I will not close them again, she said quietly. He studied her face in the dim green light. There was no bravado in her voice now, only resolve. Good, he said softly. It's easier to navigate when you can see. Above them, Ashland's fractured sky shimmered with distant fire and fading auroras. The war continued its relentless rhythm, indifferent to two figures hidden in a ravine. But something fundamental had shifted. She had expected death. He had offered something else. And in the fragile space between doctrine and defiance, both of them were beginning to understand that unpredictability might be the most dangerous force on the planet. Dawn on Ashland did not brighten the world so much as expose it. The auroras thinned, the ion clouds drifted apart, and pale sunlight filtered through a sky still bruised from the night's bombardments. The ravine lost its protective glow as the bioluminescent lichen dimmed, retreating into faint green veins along the stone. Isaac powered down the distortion field and listened. No drone hum, no engine vibration. Just wind slipping over rock and the distant, restless murmur of a war that had not yet decided whether to resume shouting. Good news, he said quietly. We're not dead. Lyria shifted carefully against the stone. She had not slept. Her species did not fully relinquish awareness in hostile environments, and the unfamiliarity of hiding beside a human soldier had ensured her mind remained alert. The analgesic had dulled her pain, but the memory of closing her eyes beneath the ruined relay station lingered like a phantom sensation. You consider that good news, she said. I set modest goals. He stood and extended a hand to her again. This time she did not hesitate before taking it. They climbed out of the ravine slowly. The ascent tested her ribs. Twice she paused, breathing through the ache. He waited without comment, though his gaze scanned the horizon constantly. The plateau above stretched toward the east in a fractured expanse of scorched earth and skeletal trees. These trees had once been engineered to glow at night for aesthetic colonization projects, long before the war repurposed beauty into cover and camouflage. In daylight, their trunks looked like bleached bones. 2 kilometers, Isaac said. There used to be an atmospheric skimmer depot beyond that ridge. Used to be, she asked. If it's still intact, we're fortunate. If it's not, we improvise. Your species relies heavily on improvisation, because planning rarely survives reality. They began walking. Ashland's gravity was fractionally lighter than standard human norm. The difference was subtle but enough to make their steps feel slightly elongated, as if the planet were uncertain about holding them. Lyria's balance wavered once. Isaac adjusted his pace instinctively to match hers. You compensate without looking, she observed. For what? My instability. I'd prefer you upright, he replied. It simplifies rescue attempts. Her elongated ears angled faintly forward, absorbing the dry humor with less confusion than before. A flicker of movement in the sky drew Isaac's attention. He raised his wrist console, scanning. 2 reconnaissance drones traced a lazy arc across the horizon, their metallic forms catching the morning light. Change of route, he said quietly. He guided her toward a shallow depression between 2 shattered ridges. The terrain there was scarred by older bombardments, craters overlapping like poorly remembered arguments. They descended into one of the larger craters just as the drones adjusted course. Lyria crouched beside him, her breathing controlled but faster than before. You appear unsurprised, she said. I assume something is always looking, he replied. It prevents disappointment. The drones passed overhead, their scanning beams slicing across the surface in tight grids. Isaac activated a low-energy countermeasure from his belt. A brief electromagnetic pulse radiated outward, subtle enough to resemble natural interference. One drone wavered slightly, recalibrating. Natural anomaly detected, a distant synthetic voice announced faintly. Isaac exhaled softly. Thank you, Ashland. They waited until the drones moved on before climbing from the crater. As they continued east, the outline of the skimmer depot emerged from behind the ridge, a cluster of low structures partially buried in dust, their landing pads cracked and overgrown, with metallic debris. Define intact, Lyria said. Optimistically damaged, Isaac replied. The main hangar doors hung crookedly on warped tracks. Inside, 3 atmospheric skimmers rested in various states of neglect. Their sleek hulls bore scorch marks and patch plating, but at least one appeared structurally sound. Isaac approached cautiously, scanning for active defense systems. None responded. Your territory, Lyria asked quietly. Formerly contested, he corrected. Now abandoned by both sides because neither wants to admit losing it. He circled the nearest skimmer, running his hand along the hull. Come on, he murmured. You and I can both pretend we're functional. You speak to machines frequently, Lyria observed. They respond better than some officers. He accessed the maintenance panel along the side. The interface flickered weakly, drawing minimal power from a depleted core. Battery's dead, he muttered. Engine coils probably fused. Navigation array. He paused, squinting at the diagnostics. Insulted. Insulted, she echoed. It's a technical term. He removed a compact power cell from his pack and connected it to the skimmer's auxiliary port. The hull vibrated faintly as dormant systems stirred. Lyria watched him work, studying the precision of his movements. There was no hesitation in his hands now, no visible sign of fear. Only focus. You repair enemy technology, she said. Gravity doesn't care who built it, he replied. It either flies or it doesn't. The engine coils sputtered once, emitting a disgruntled whine. Isaac leaned closer to the open panel. I know, he said. Mornings are difficult. The skimmer's internal display flickered to life, projecting a holographic schematic of its systems. Several components glowed red. 3 critical faults, he murmured. We only need it to survive 15 minutes of flight. That seems insufficiently cautious. 15 minutes of functional recklessness is plenty. He retrieved a micro tool from his belt and began bypassing the damaged regulator. Sparks danced briefly before the engine stabilized into a low, steady hum. Lyria's gaze drifted toward the hangar entrance. The open plain beyond shimmered faintly in the growing heat. "You trust this machine," she said. "I trust that it wants to avoid exploding," he replied. "Self-preservation is universal." She studied him again. "And you? What about me? You risk being labeled traitor." He tightened a connection and sealed the panel. "Labels are easy to assign," he said, "harder to live by." The engine's hum deepened, settling into a stable rhythm. He stepped back and gestured toward the cockpit. "After you." She hesitated only a second before climbing into the passenger seat. The interior was narrow but functional, control panels curving around the pilot's position. Isaac slid into the pilot's seat and powered up the navigation array. Static flickered across the display before resolving into a rough terrain map. "Flight path will be low altitude," he said. "We hug the surface. Avoid open sky. If we're lucky, we'll look like debris with ambition." She fastened the restraint harness carefully, her injured shoulder protesting the movement. "Are you afraid?" she asked suddenly. He considered the question while guiding the skimmer onto the cracked landing pad. "Yes," he said, "but I'm also stubborn." "That is not an answer." "It's the only one I have." He engaged the thrusters. The skimmer lifted from the pad with a jolt, hovering briefly before surging forward. Dust spiraled behind them as they skimmed just meters above the ground, engines straining but holding. Lyria gripped the edge of her seat, eyes fixed on the terrain rushing past. "You call this cautious?" she demanded over the rising engine noise. "I call it scenic," he replied. The ridge fell away behind them. Ahead stretched a jagged corridor between fractured rock formations. Natural cover against aerial detection. Isaac guided the skimmer into the corridor, adjusting thrust to maintain low altitude. The hull scraped lightly against a protruding outcrop. "Minor disagreement with geology," he muttered. Behind them, a distant alarm tone echoed faintly across the comm band. "They have detected power fluctuations," Lyria said. "Of course they have." Two drone signatures appeared on the navigation display, converging from the north. Isaac's jaw tightened slightly, though his voice remained light. "This is the part where improvisation becomes mandatory." He cut primary thrust abruptly, allowing the skimmer to drop into a shallow canyon. The drones overshot their position momentarily. He re-engaged engines at half power, weaving through the canyon's tight turns. Lyria's pulse quickened, but she did not close her eyes. "Why persist?" she asked over the roar. He glanced at her briefly, then back at the narrowing canyon ahead. "Because you didn't," he said. The drones adjusted course again, their metallic forms glinting above the canyon rim. Isaac activated a flare module, launching two decoy signatures into the sky. The drones split their pursuit, chasing the false signals. He exhaled slowly as the canyon widened. "See?" he said. "Predictable." The skimmer burst from the canyon's end onto a plateau where the terrain shifted subtly, markers of the human-controlled perimeter barely visible along the horizon. Lyria stared ahead. "You cross into your territory," she said. "We cross," he corrected. The engine strained one last time before Isaac reduced thrust and guided the skimmer into a shallow descent behind a cluster of shield pylons. The craft settled onto the ground with a heavy thud, engines fading into silence. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ashland's wind brushed against the hull, indifferent as ever. Isaac unfastened his harness and glanced at her. "You're still alive," he said. She met his gaze steadily. "So are you." And this time, neither of them looked away. The shield pylons hummed with a low, disciplined vibration, projecting a faintly visible barrier that rippled like heat above the fractured ground. Beyond it, the human forward perimeter rose in modular layers of alloy and light. Defensive turrets tracking the horizon, sensor masts blinking in quiet synchronization. Armored personnel moving with the rigid efficiency of those who had long ago memorized the choreography of caution. Isaac powered down the skimmer completely and rested his hands on the controls for a brief second longer than necessary. "Well," he murmured, "this is where my day becomes complicated." Lyria watched the distant figures through the cockpit glass. Their silhouettes were unmistakably human. Broader shoulders, rounded ears, compact helmets reflecting the pale Ashland sun. "They will not welcome me," she said. "They will welcome paperwork even less," he replied. "We'll distract them with confusion." He stepped out first, boots hitting the dust with a dull thud. The wind caught at his uniform as he circled to her side and lowered the external step. She descended carefully, favoring her uninjured side. The moment her boots touched the ground inside the perimeter's outer sensor grid, a soft alarm chimed from the nearest tower. 3 rifles lifted in near-perfect unison. "Sergeant Grant," one of the soldiers called sharply. "Identify the—" "Guest," Isaac interrupted, raising a hand. "Identify the guest." The nearest soldier lowered his weapon a fraction, confusion battling protocol. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," Isaac said. "She's injured. She's under my protection." The word protection hung in the air like a provocation. Lyria felt every gaze fixed on her elongated ears, on the insignia still faintly visible on her torn uniform. She stood upright despite the ache in her ribs, meeting their stares without lowering her eyes. One of the perimeter officers approached cautiously, visor retracting to reveal a weathered face marked by exhaustion and suspicion. "Grant," the officer said slowly. "Explain." Isaac gestured vaguely toward the west. "Relay station collapse. Found her under debris. No immediate threat. Significant injuries." "I made a judgment call." The officer's gaze flicked to Lyria, then back to Isaac. "A judgment call." "Yes, sir." "You're aware of standing orders." "I am." "And you chose to disregard them." "I chose to prioritize survival." The officer studied him for a long moment. Then unexpectedly he sighed. "Medical," he called over his shoulder. "Now." 2 medics hurried forward with a hover stretcher, their movements brisk but not aggressive. Lyria tensed instinctively as they approached. Isaac leaned slightly closer to her and spoke quietly. "They're going to help. If they intended harm, they'd be much louder." She did not understand the logic of that statement, but she did not pull away when the medics scanned her injuries. One medic frowned at the readings. "She's lucky." "Luck is overrated," Isaac said. "Skill is more flattering." The medic shot him a brief look. "You brought an enemy combatant inside the perimeter. She's not currently combating." The hover stretcher adjusted height, inviting her to lie down. Lyria hesitated only a second before complying, though her eyes remained open, tracking every motion around her. As they moved her toward the inner medical unit, Isaac walked beside the stretcher, despite the officer's pointed stare. "You realize this will be reviewed," the officer said quietly. "I assume everything is reviewed," Isaac replied. "We're very thorough." Inside the perimeter, the air felt different, less metallic, filtered and controlled. Modular walls formed a temporary clinic illuminated by clean white light that contrasted sharply with Ashland's fractured landscape. The medics transferred Lyria to a stabilization bed. A diagnostic array descended from above, projecting layered holographic scans of her internal systems. She watched the alien architecture of human technology move around her with detached alertness. The equipment was not so different from her own people's medical systems, though the design language lacked the fluid curvature she was accustomed to. Human devices favored edges. Isaac leaned against a nearby console, arms crossed loosely. "You're hovering," one medic observed without looking at him. "I prefer to supervise." "You're not her commanding officer." "No," he agreed. "Just responsible." Lyria's gaze shifted to him at that word. Responsible. The diagnostic array emitted a soft tone. "Fractures confirmed," one medic said. "Internal bruising. No organ failure." "That's encouraging," Isaac said. "Barely." A slender device extended from the ceiling and projected a focused regeneration field over her ribs. Warmth spread through her side, knitting microfractures with quiet efficiency. She exhaled slowly. Isaac noticed and offered a faint smile. "See? Functional ugliness." Her ears angled slightly, absorbing the reassurance. Outside the clinic walls, raised voices echoed faintly. Arguments carried through thin alloy. Words like protocol and violation and risk drifted indistinctly through the air. "You are causing disruption," Lyria said quietly. "I tend to," Isaac admitted. "Your people are divided." "They always are." She studied the ceiling lights for a moment. "If they decide I am a liability," he met her gaze steadily, "then they'll have to explain it to me. You cannot protect me from your entire military. I don't intend to fight them," he said lightly. Just annoy them into reconsideration. Despite the sterile brightness around her, despite the unfamiliar uniforms and glances, a strange calm settled beneath her ribs. Deeper than the medical warmth knitting bone, the regeneration field powered down. One medic adjusted her brace and stepped back. "She'll recover," the medic said to Isaac. "Physically." "Emotionally?" he asked. "That's not in my job description." Isaac nodded as if that made perfect sense. Moments later, the perimeter officer entered the clinic, expression carefully neutral. "Command is aware," he said. "They want a statement." "Of course they do. They also want to question her." Lyria's muscles tightened slightly beneath the brace. Isaac straightened. "Not alone." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Grant." "She's injured," Isaac said evenly, "and she came here under my word." The officer studied him again, weighing consequences. "You've complicated things," he said at last. "I've improved them," Isaac replied. "Statistically, at least one less casualty." The officer did not smile, but something in his posture softened. "5 minutes," he said. "Then she's transferred to secured holding pending review." Lyria looked between them. "Secured holding," she repeated. "Think of it as a very boring room," Isaac said, "with less dust." "That is not comforting," he shrugged faintly. "Comfort is relative." The officer left without further comment. Silence lingered in the clinic. Lyria turned her head slightly toward Isaac. "You persist." "Yes." "Even now." "Yes." She studied his face, searching for doubt. She found determination instead. Quiet, stubborn, unadorned. "When I closed my eyes," she said softly, "I believed I understood your kind. And now? Now I do not." He gave a small, almost rueful smile. "Good. Understanding is overrated." Outside, Ashland's wind brushed against the shield barrier, distorting its surface in faint ripples. Inside, beneath artificial light and procedural tension, an alien woman lay healing in the heart of enemy territory, and a human soldier stood beside her, not as captor, not as interrogator, but as something far more destabilizing. An exception. And exceptions, Isaac knew, had a habit of changing the rules. The holding room was, as Isaac had promised, profoundly boring. It was square, reinforced, and aggressively neutral in color, as if someone had designed it specifically to discourage dramatic monologues. A transparent energy partition shimmered faintly across one wall, separating the interior from a narrow observation corridor. Beyond it, silhouettes moved in muted discussion. Lyria sat on the edge of a low modular bench, her ribs wrapped in a flexible support mesh that adjusted subtly with each breath. The regeneration treatment had accelerated her recovery, but fatigue lingered like a quiet shadow behind her thoughts. Isaac stood on her side of the partition. That had taken negotiation. "I am not an interrogator," he had informed command with polite stubbornness. "I am a witness with inconvenient opinions." Apparently, that had been persuasive enough. 2 officers entered the observation corridor, their uniforms bearing insignia denoting strategic oversight rather than field command. One activated the partition's audio interface. "Identify yourself," the older officer said calmly. Lyria straightened, her elongated ears catching the sterile light. "I am Lyria of the Valari Expeditionary Guard," she replied evenly. "Recon Unit Designation 12-7. The younger officer's gaze flicked briefly toward Isaac, then back to her. "You were discovered inside contested territory." "Yes." "Your mission parameters?" "Survey and signal relay recalibration." Isaac leaned lightly against the wall, arms folded. He had learned to appear relaxed during scrutiny. It unsettled superiors. The older officer studied Lyria for a long moment. "Your unit engaged ours 2 days prior." "Yes. And you expect us to believe you pose no threat." She held his gaze. "If I intended harm, I would not have accepted medical treatment." Isaac coughed softly. To be fair, she did expect to be executed. Both officers glanced at him. "That will be enough, Sergeant," the older one said. "I specialize in context," Isaac replied. The younger officer tapped a control on his wrist console. A holographic projection appeared between them. Battlefield footage from the ruined relay station. Isaac's armored form kneeling beside Lyria's prone body. The moment she closed her eyes, The moment he removed his helmet, the moment he leaned down, the projection paused there. The younger officer's eyebrow lifted slightly. Explain. Isaac looked at the frozen image, then back at them. It seemed efficient. Efficient, the older officer repeated flatly. She was injured, terrified. Killing her would not have improved our strategic position. You are not authorized to determine strategic outcomes. No, Isaac agreed, but I am authorized to assess immediate threats. She was not one. Silence stretched. Lyria observed the exchange carefully. The human officer's posture suggested tension restrained by procedure. Their species, she was learning, wrapped conflict in language before releasing it. The older officer turned back to her. Your people teach that we execute prisoners? Yes. And now? She paused only briefly. Now I have contradictory evidence. Isaac allowed himself a faint smile. The younger officer deactivated the projection. You understand that your presence here could destabilize negotiations already in progress. Negotiations? Isaac echoed. The older officer shot him a warning look. Classified. Clearly. Lyria absorbed this information silently. If negotiations existed, then the war's permanence was already in question. What do you intend to do with me? She asked. The officers exchanged a glance. Pending review, the older one said, you will remain under protective detention. Protective, Isaac repeated. It is accurate, the officer replied evenly. There are individuals within our ranks who would not respond as Sergeant Grant did. I am aware, Lyria said quietly. The younger officer studied her expression. You would be returned in exchange if terms allow. Isaac's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Returned, he repeated. That is the logical outcome. Lyria felt the words settle inside her. Return meant safety within her own command structure. It also meant interrogation of a different kind. Questions about her conduct, her failure to resist, her acceptance of enemy assistance. You are displeased, she said to Isaac once the officer stepped aside to confer quietly. I am processing, he replied. She tilted her head. You risked much to bring me here, yet you do not wish me to leave. He considered that honestly. I wish you safe, he said. Location is secondary. That is not what your expression indicates. He exhaled softly. You're very observant. A faint vibration rippled through the holding room as shield pylons outside recalibrated. The war remained close even within reinforced walls. The older officer returned his attention to them. Sergeant Grant, you will submit a full report, including your discretionary actions. Of course. And you will refrain from further unauthorized engagements. Isaac nodded. Define further. The officer did not respond. When they left, the energy partition dimmed slightly, leaving Isaac and Lyria in a quieter isolation. She regarded him steadily. You appear dissatisfied. I dislike variables I can't influence, he admitted. You cannot influence everything. That has never stopped me from trying. She allowed that to settle. Why persist? She asked again, echoing her earlier question from the canyon. He looked at her through the faint shimmer of the barrier. Because when you closed your eyes, he said slowly, you had already accepted a version of me that wasn't true. I don't like being misrepresented. Her ears angled slightly forward. You are offended by propaganda. I'm offended by bad storytelling. A faint, incredulous sound escaped her, almost laughter again. He stepped closer to the barrier, lowering his voice. If negotiations are real, he said, your testimony matters. You believe my account could alter policy? I believe reality is inconvenient for those who prefer simple narratives. She studied him with new intensity. You would use my survival as evidence. I would use your existence, he corrected. Outside the holding room, alarm tones suddenly rose, short, sharp pulses indicating perimeter disturbance. Isaac straightened instantly. Not now, he muttered. The barrier flickered as power rerouted toward external defenses. Lyria stood despite the residual ache in her ribs. Attack? She asked. Probe, he replied, listening to the pattern of alerts. Testing response time. Through a narrow viewport high on the wall, flashes of distant light flickered against the sky. Your people? She asked. Possibly. She moved closer to the viewport, eyes narrowing. I recognize that formation, she said quietly. It is not a full assault. It is distraction. Isaac glanced at her sharply. For what? She turned back toward him, understanding dawning too quickly. For retrieval. As if summoned by the word, a sharper alarm cut through the corridor outside. Internal sensors pinged, an unidentified signal spike within perimeter range. Isaac swore softly under his breath. You think they're coming for you, he said. Yes. He ran a hand through his hair, already calculating possibilities. Protective detention just became literal, he muttered. The energy partition brightened again as emergency lockdown protocols activated. Outside, boots pounded along metal corridors. Lyria met his gaze steadily. If my people breach this perimeter, she said, they will not negotiate. And if mine respond, he replied, they won't either. The air seemed to tighten between them, charged not only with threat but with consequence. You could step back, she said quietly, allow events to proceed. He gave her a look that made the suggestion almost amusing. You've met me, he said. Another tremor shook the facility, stronger this time. Dust sifted from overhead seams. Beyond the walls, Ashland's war reached toward them again, relentless and impatient. Inside the holding room, an alien woman and a human soldier stood on opposite sides of a barrier that no longer felt like separation, but like a fragile line drawn between two escalating futures. And neither of them, this time, closed their eyes. The impact did not come as an explosion, but as a shudder, deep, metallic, controlled. Ashland's wind carried the distant roar of engines as Valari retrieval craft cut low across the horizon, their hulls glinting like curved blades beneath a fractured sky. Inside the holding sector, red emergency light washed over steel walls and pale faces alike. Isaac did not wait for orders. That formation you recognized, he said quickly, stepping closer to the energy partition. How precise is their targeting? Lyria listened to the pattern of distant pulses, the rhythm of Valari propulsion systems harmonizing through the ground. Very, she answered. They do not strike blindly. Good, he muttered, because if they breach this perimeter, my superiors will respond enthusiastically. Boots thundered past in the corridor. Defensive turrets outside recalibrated with mechanical clicks. The energy partition flickered and dissolved as the lockdown protocol shifted from containment to coordinated response. An officer stepped into the room. They're demanding immediate return of Valari Operative 12-7, he said sharply, or they escalate. Lyria moved forward without hesitation. I will speak, she said. The officer hesitated. You are under... She will speak, Isaac interrupted quietly, not loudly enough to challenge rank, but firmly enough to anchor the moment. The officer studied them both, calculating risk against opportunity. Then he nodded once. They escorted Lyria to a communications chamber near the perimeter's central command node. Transparent alloy panels revealed the outer defenses, shield pylons flaring brighter as Valari craft hovered at standoff range. A holographic projection snapped into existence in the center of the chamber. 3 Valari commanders appeared, their elongated ears adorned with formal insignia, expressions carved from discipline and alarm. Lyria, one said sharply, report. She stood upright despite the brace along her ribs. I am alive, she said evenly, injured but stabilized. You are within human perimeter, another commander said. Extract immediately. Coordinates are transmitted. Lyria did not move. I was discovered unconscious, she continued. The human soldier who found me did not execute me. A flicker passed across the commander's expressions, subtle, restrained. He violated protocol, one said. That does not negate broader patterns. He treated my injuries, she said. He transported me through contested terrain at personal risk. Isaac stood at the edge of the chamber, arms folded loosely, resisting the urge to make a comment about paperwork. The Valari commander's gaze sharpened. You were compromised. No, Lyria said quietly. I was corrected. Silence rippled through the holographic feed. I closed my eyes, she continued, because our doctrine assured me of death. I was wrong. Outside, Valari craft adjusted position, their grav engines humming impatiently. You base strategic assessment on singular anomaly, one commander said. I base it on lived evidence, she replied. If negotiations are underway, this is not anomaly. It is opportunity. In the control chamber, human officers exchanged glances. Isaac felt something shift, not in the room but in himself. Weeks ago, he would have let policy dictate silence. He would have filed a report and returned to patrol. Now he stepped forward. With respect, he said, addressing both holographic commanders and human officers alike. Continuing escalation over an assumption disproven in real time seems inefficient. One Vilari commander's gaze locked onto him. You speak boldly for one soldier. I've had practice today, he replied. A faint, almost imperceptible tilt of Lyria's ear suggested she recognized the humor. The human perimeter commander entered the chamber then, expression composed. Vilari command, he said evenly. Our internal review confirms Sergeant Grant's account. No harm was inflicted. Medical stabilization was provided. You expect us to trust that? One holographic figure asked. No, the human commander replied calmly. We expect you to verify it. He gestured toward Lyria. She stands before you alive. That is data. The tension in the room tightened, not explosive but precise. Lyria stepped slightly closer to the projection. If you extract me by force, she said to her own commanders, you validate the fear our doctrines teach. If you allow negotiation, you validate the evidence before you. Outside, Vilari engines shifted tone, hovering at the edge of decision. The human commander folded his hands behind his back. We propose supervised transfer at neutral ground, he said. No weapons, no tactical advantage. A pause, long enough for Ashland's wind to scrape against shield pylons and remind everyone that the planet had endured far longer than their conflict. At last, one Vilari commander inclined her head. Agreed, she said. The holographic feed dissolved. In the chamber, tension released in quiet increments. Isaac exhaled slowly. Well, he murmured, that was only mildly catastrophic. Lyria turned toward him. You contributed, she said. I made commentary, he corrected. Hours later, at a neutral plateau marked by overlapping sensor fields from both sides, the exchange took place. Vilari envoys approached from the west, human officers from the east. No raised weapons, no drones overhead. Lyria stood between them, the brace still visible along her side, but her posture unwavering. Isaac remained several paces behind the human delegation, officially uninvolved, unofficially invested. When the moment came, Lyria stepped forward toward her people. She paused once. She turned back. Their eyes met across the open ground. When I closed my eyes, she said quietly, so only he could hear, I believed I understood your species. And now, he asked, now I understand that fear is often louder than truth. He nodded once. You didn't close them again, he said. No. She studied him carefully. You have changed as well. How? You no longer speak only to survive. You speak to alter outcomes. He considered that. That sounds exhausting, he said. It is necessary. A faint smile touched her lips. Vilari envoys reached her side. One placed a hand lightly on her shoulder in acknowledgement. Isaac resisted the impulse to step closer. You'll be questioned, he said quietly. Yes. Tell them the truth. I intend to. She inclined her head slightly, a gesture of respect not dictated by protocol. Sergeant Isaac Grant, she said formally, your inefficiency altered probability. I'll put that on my evaluation report, he replied. For the briefest second, laughter hovered between them. Not loud, not reckless, but real. Then she turned and walked toward her delegation. The two groups retreated to their respective sides, leaving the plateau empty once more. Ashland's wind moved freely across it, indifferent to lines drawn and redrawn. Days later, official channels confirmed what had begun in that holding room. Formal ceasefire negotiations, joint archaeological surveys beneath Ashland's crust, shared access to any archives discovered. The war did not end in spectacle. It ended in paperwork, compromise, and cautious optimism. Isaac returned to patrol duty, though his assignments shifted subtly. His superiors now consulted him on matters of cross-species engagement. Apparently, unpredictability had strategic value. He found himself speaking more often in briefing rooms than in ravines. He found himself arguing for nuance. And sometimes when ion storms shimmered faintly across Ashland's sky, he would look toward the western horizon and imagine Valari ships gliding above their own territory, where engines humming in patterns he now recognized. He no longer assumed every shadow held hostility. On Ashland, that was a radical change. One evening, as he stood atop a ridge overlooking the fractured plains, a secure message arrived on his wrist console. Minimal text, encrypted Valari origin, alive, eyes open. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he smiled. Good, he murmured to the restless planet beneath his boots. That's efficient. The wind carried his voice into the vastness. And somewhere beyond the contested lines, an alien woman who had once closed her eyes and waited for death now looked at the horizon differently, seeing not inevitability, but possibility. On a world built from conflict, that was enough.